Talking to the Toaster. Chapter 1. The Diagnosis, the Dramatics, and the Dozen Digestive Biscuits. I want to be very clear about one thing before we go any further. I am not losing my mind. My mind is simply becoming a little more selective about what it chooses to retain. Like a very discerning librarian who has decided to quietly shelve certain things in a room nobody visits anymore. The room labeled, where I put my reading glasses, and what day the bin goes out. The important things. The recipes, the opinions, the embarrassing stories about my children. Those are perfectly intact. Thank you very much. It started with a Tuesday. Or possibly a Wednesday. My daughter Fiona would say it started much earlier. She'd probably cite the incident with the iron and the cat, though I maintain the cat was fine and the iron was barely warm. But officially, as far as the medical profession is concerned, it started when I went to the supermarket for milk, and came home with 11 tins of chickpeas, a foam swimming noodle, and no milk. "Mum," said Fiona, when she came round for tea, and found me staring at the chickpeas arranged on the counter like some kind of ancient archaeological site. "When did you last sleep properly?" "I sleep magnificently," I told her. Which was true. My sleeping is the envy of anyone who has ever tried to wake me before 9 o'clock. That was April. By June, I had seen Dr. Patel, a very nice young man who had the kindly, careful manner of someone delivering news he'd practiced in a mirror. We talked for a long time. He used phrases like, early indicators, and mild cognitive changes, and nothing to panic about, Margaret. Though of course the moment someone says, nothing to panic about, the sensible response is to immediately begin panicking. Which I did, quietly, in the car park of the surgery, over a packet of digestive biscuits I'd found in my handbag. I ate 8 of them. It seemed warranted. I am 67 years old. I have raised 2 children largely on my own. After their father Gerald decided at 52 that what he really needed was a motorboat and a woman named Cheryl who taught spinning classes. I have held down a job as a secondary school librarian for 31 years. I have survived a kitchen flood. 3 separate incidents involving Fiona's teenage hair experimentation, and a particularly grim Christmas when my son Daniel brought home a girlfriend who announced at the dinner table that she didn't really believe in cooked food. I have, by any reasonable measure, handled a great deal. So when Dr. Patel suggested I might consider activities that keep the mind engaged, and reminiscence work to strengthen neural pathways, I listened very carefully. And then I drove home, made a pot of tea, and ate the remaining 4 digestive biscuits. The idea came from Daniel, which surprised me, because Daniel's ideas usually involve some form of technology that requires a 3-hour tutorial, and leaves me feeling as though I've wandered into a foreign country without a phrase book. He'd been reading, he said. Research. He and Fiona had been talking. We thought. He said. And the we was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. I could tell. That you might want to record some stories. Your stories. For us. And maybe for later. He didn't say what later was. He didn't have to. Like a video diary? I said. Like the living legacy, Fiona said, from the other end of the sofa, where she had arranged herself with the careful casualness of someone who has rehearsed their position in a conversation. We set up a tablet for you. It's easy. You just press the button and talk. I looked at them both. My children. Daniel, 41, with Gerald's forehead and my tendency to overthink. Fiona, 38, with my stubbornness and, unfortunately, Gerald's inability to parallel park. They were both trying very hard not to look worried, which meant they were extremely worried, which meant I had to be the one to make this less terrible for all of us. Right, I said. A living legacy. That sounds very grand. It doesn't have to be grand, Daniel said. It just has to be you. And that, really, was the most I had cried since the chickpeas. The tablet arrived on a Thursday. Or possibly a Friday. It was propped up on the kitchen table with a sticky note from Daniel that said, "Press the big circle to start. Do not press anything else." I made myself a cup of tea, sat down opposite it, and pressed the big circle. "Hello," I said to the tablet. The tablet stared back at me with the blank, patient expression of something that has all the time in the world. "Right," I said. "I suppose I should introduce myself." And so I did. Margaret Elspeth Harwood, née Crompton. Mother, librarian, survivor of Gerald. Selective librarian of her own memories. Beginning, somewhat belatedly and entirely against her better judgment, to talk. Chapter 2. In which I tell the story of the camping holiday, and several things come to light. The second recording session did not go smoothly. And I think it's only fair to document this for the sake of accuracy. I had decided, after much deliberation, to begin with the 1994 camping holiday. This was, by any objective measure, a foundational event in our family history. Not because it was wonderful, which it was not, but because it was the kind of catastrophic experience that forges people together in the way that only shared suffering can. We returned from that holiday as a tighter unit. Mostly because we had to cling to each other for warmth after the tent blew away. I pressed the big circle. I cleared my throat. I said, "I'm going to tell you about the summer we went to the Lake District." And then I laughed for approximately 4 minutes and had to start again. The thing about the 1994 camping holiday is that it went wrong in such a comprehensive, almost artistic way that even now, 30 years later, it remains a kind of masterpiece of misfortune. Gerald had booked the campsite. Gerald had packed the equipment. Gerald had assured us, repeatedly and with the confidence of a man who has read exactly one article about camping, that he knew what he was doing. He did not know what he was doing. The tent had been purchased from a car boot sale 3 days before departure, which Gerald defended by saying it was barely used. A claim disproven by the discovery, on our first night, that it was missing 2 of its 4 supporting poles and had a zipper that worked only intermittently, and only when addressed in a firm voice. The sleeping bags were damp before we even got into them. Daniel, who was 9, announced he was never going camping again. And has, to his credit, kept that promise to this day. Fiona, who was 6, thought the whole thing was magnificent. She jumped in every puddle she encountered. She befriended a sheep. She ate a substantial portion of her breakfast cereal dry because she found the milk suspicious. She was, and remains, a deeply resilient person. I got the story out, eventually, in between bouts of laughter, and 1 or 2 moments where I had to set the tablet down because I was remembering Gerald before everything went wrong. Gerald as he was in 1994, sunburned and baffled, trying to read a compass in the rain. pointing us confidently south when north was very clearly the correct direction. There had been good things about Gerald. It would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. I pressed the big circle to stop. I sat for a moment. Then I pressed it again. I want to add something, I said. About your father. This isn't to defend him, because he was. You both know what he was and what he did. And I'm not going to relitigate the divorce. We've all moved on, or we're at least pretending to. Which amounts to the same thing. But I want you to know that he was funny. When things went wrong, he made them funny. That was a gift, and you both have it. Daniel, you get it from him, that ability to laugh at yourself. Fiona, you got it from me, which means yours has more of an edge to it, which is fine, but be careful with that. You can make people feel small if you're not watching. I hadn't planned to say any of that. I hadn't even thought it, not in so many words. Not before the tablet was running and the words were simply arriving, fully formed, from wherever they live. That was the thing I was beginning to understand about this project. It wasn't just remembering. It was thinking. Or rather, it was the kind of thinking you only do when someone is listening. When there's an audience, even a silent one. I had spent 67 years having conversations in my own head, and arriving at conclusions nobody else ever heard. Now here was a machine, patient and unhurried, ready to receive whatever I chose to give it. I made another cup of tea and pressed the circle again. The sheep, I said. I should tell you about the sheep. Fiona, you tried to keep it. You had named it Gerald. Yes, I know. And you were absolutely convinced that if we just folded it into the back of the Volvo, we could sort the logistics later. Your father and I argued about this for 20 minutes. Which was impressive, given that the sheep had a clearer sense of its own interests than either of us, and had already wandered back up the hill. You cried. The sheep did not. I think there's a lesson in that somewhere. I stopped the recording. I made a note on the pad by the tablet. Sheep. Fiona. Resilience. Then, because I was feeling productive, I started a new note. Things I should have said to my children years ago and I'm now saying to a tablet instead. It was a long list. Chapter 3. Technical difficulties, unexpected visitors, and the Great Biscuit Taxonomy. By week 3, I had developed what I can only describe as a relationship with the tablet. Not a complicated one. I am not the sort of person who talks to appliances. I want to be clear about that, despite what Fiona will tell you about the toaster. But a kind of comfortable understanding. I would sit down with my tea. The tablet would wait. I would talk. This arrangement suited us both. The children had set it up so that the recordings uploaded automatically to something called the cloud, which I find deeply unsettling as a concept but have chosen not to examine too closely. The way I choose not to examine the terms and conditions of anything I agree to online. Ignorance, in certain circumstances, is a form of peace. It was during week 3 that Daniel came to visit unexpectedly. And found me in the middle of a recording about the time I accidentally attended the wrong school parents' evening, and spent 40 minutes discussing the academic progress of a child I had never met. Mom, he said, from the doorway. Shush, I said, because I was on a roll. He stood there for a moment, then quietly put the kettle on and sat down at the kitchen table. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, The story ends with me discovering the error at the point where the teacher mentioned young Barnaby's struggles with long division. And the real Barnaby was 1 year old at the time. Daniel was grinning. "I've never heard that story," he said. "You were 11. I didn't want you to know I was capable of that level of incompetence. Parental authority requires a certain mystique." "How many of these have you recorded?" 17. Possibly 18. I recorded one in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep and I'm not sure it was entirely coherent, so I may delete that one. He looked at me with an expression I recognized. The one where he is trying to decide whether to say the thing he's thinking or the safer, easier thing. He has had this expression since he was about 14. He got it from me. "Don't delete it," he said. It was 3 in the morning, Daniel. I was talking about my mother's lemon drizzle cake for 20 minutes. "Keep it," he said. "We want all of it. Even the middle of the night ones. Especially those, maybe." I looked at him. He looked at me. The kettle finished boiling, which gave us both somewhere to look that wasn't at each other, which was a relief. That afternoon, with Daniel sitting at the kitchen table doing something on his laptop that he claimed was work, but which I strongly suspect involved a word puzzle of some kind, I recorded the Biscuit taxonomy. This was not planned. I had been going to record the story of Fiona's birth, which is dramatic and funny and ends well, but I got sidetracked by the biscuit tin, and then I started thinking about biscuits and their role in our family, and then I was off. "I want to tell you about biscuits," I said to the tablet. Daniel made a noise that might have been a laugh, suppressed. In this family, biscuits have always been the primary unit of emotional expression. If your grandmother was happy, she made shortbread. If she was worried about you, she produced ginger nuts without explanation. When your father left, the neighbors brought so many digestive biscuits that I had to start giving them to the birds. The birds, it turned out, did not want digestive biscuits. They had standards. I went on. I covered the specific hierarchy of biscuits. Chocolate digestive at the apex. Fig roll, controversial, in a separate taxonomy entirely. The incident where I sent Fiona to school with a lunchbox containing, by mistake, 12 custard creams and nothing else. She was fine. She said it was the best lunch she'd ever had. This told me something about her character. And Daniel's childhood conviction that rich tea biscuits were a punishment and should be deployed only in circumstances of genuine wrongdoing. "That's still true," Daniel said, from behind his laptop. "Rich tea biscuits are fundamentally punitive." "You're in the recording," I told him. "Good," he said. "Tell them I stand by it." I stopped the recording and looked at my son, 41 years old and apparently still ready to go to the mat over biscuit philosophy, and I felt something shift in my chest. A warmth, or something like warmth. The specific kind you feel when you realize a moment is going to matter later and you're still inside it. I had not expected this project to be enjoyable. I had not expected to laugh this much, to discover this much, to find that the act of telling things to a machine could somehow bring the people I love closer into the room. "Right," I said. "Fiona's birth. That's next." "Do I need to leave?" Daniel said. "Absolutely not. You were there for part of it." I was 7. I was in the waiting room. You were very supportive. I'm going to say so on the record. He smiled, and I pressed the circle, and we continued. Chapter 4. Fiona arrives, and everything gets complicated in the best possible way. Fiona did not take the news well. This is not a criticism. Fiona does not take most news well initially. She processes things at her own pace and in her own way, which generally involves going very quiet and then coming back 3 days later with 27 questions and a position she's prepared to defend under cross-examination. It is one of her better qualities, if occasionally exhausting. She came over on a Sunday, which she does most Sundays, and found me at the kitchen table with the tablet and a notepad covered in what she described as hieroglyphics, and what I would call a perfectly reasonable system of memory prompts, organized by theme and approximate decade. "What is that?" she said. "Notes for my recordings. You've filled 3 pages. It's been a productive week." She sat down. She looked at the tablet. The tablet sat there in its characteristically neutral way. "Can I listen to one?" she asked. "They're for both of you. They're for later." I paused. "Well, they're for now, too, I suppose. If you want." "I want," she said, in a voice that was doing its level best to be steady and mostly succeeding. We listened to the camping holiday one. I watched her face while it played. The series of expressions crossing it like weather. Amusement, then laughter. She remembered the sheep with perfect clarity. The sheep, she said, had been philosophically interesting. Then something softer when I got to the part about Gerald being funny. She didn't say anything when it finished. She sat very still. Then she said, "You said I have an edge to me." "You do. It's not a bad thing." I said to be careful with it. "I didn't know you thought that." There are, I suspect, quite a few things I think that have never adequately made it out of my head and into a sentence. That is, apparently, what this is for. She looked at the tablet again. "Can I do one?" she said. "Can I record something? For you?" I hadn't considered this. The project, in my mind, had been one-directional. Me talking, them listening. But there was no reason, technically, why it couldn't go the other way. Why it couldn't become a conversation. "Press the big circle," I told her. She pressed it. She cleared her throat. She said, "Hi, Mum. It's Fiona." She told me about the first time she had taken the bus to school by herself, which I had forgotten. She was 10. She had been absolutely terrified and had not said so, because she'd begged to be allowed to do it independently, and couldn't bear to admit the terror. She got on the wrong bus, rode it for 4 stops in the wrong direction, got off, found the right one, arrived at school 17 minutes late, and told the teacher she'd been held up by traffic, which was, she said, technically true because I was in traffic, just not the right traffic. "I never told you," she said, "because you would have worried. And because I was so proud of myself for fixing it. I just wanted you to know now. That I fixed it. That I've always. When things go wrong, I fix it. You taught me that. I don't know if you know that you taught me that." She pressed the circle to stop. She looked at me. "I didn't know that story," I said. "Now you do." We recorded for 2 hours that afternoon. Fiona told me things I had never known. The time in secondary school when she'd had a falling out with her best friend and hadn't said anything for 3 weeks because she didn't want to worry me. The night before her wedding when she'd been not nervous about the wedding but about whether she'd made something of herself, something good enough, and whether I was proud of her. She had not asked. She was 34 at her wedding. She had not asked. Fiona, I said, when she'd finished. I press stop now? Press stop. I pressed stop. I looked at my daughter. I have been proud of you since the day you managed the sheep situation with more dignity than either your father or I could muster. I was proud of you when you parallel parked badly and didn't let it stop you from trying again. I am proud of you now. I was going to record all of this myself, separately, without you present, and now I realize that was mad and we should have been talking like this years ago. We're talking now, she said. We are, I said. We really are. We had biscuits. Proper ones. Chocolate digestives, because the occasion warranted it. We talked until it was dark, and then Fiona stayed for dinner, and we talked some more, and the tablet sat quietly on the table and we didn't press the circle at all, because some conversations are just for the room. Chapter 5. The box, the button, and everything it contains. It is now 4 months since the camping holiday recording. I have made, by my last count, 43 separate recordings. They range in length from 4 minutes. A very focused account of how to make my mother's apple cake, including the note that you should ignore what the recipe says about the oven temperature. It is wrong and always has been. To 47 minutes. An only slightly rambling journey through the 1990s, touching on 3 separate school plays, 2 broken arms, 1 spectacular misunderstanding involving a school trip permission slip, and the time Daniel attempted to teach himself guitar for 6 weeks and then simply stopped, leaving the guitar in the hallway for 8 months as a monument to ambition. Daniel has listened to all of them. He told me this on a Tuesday. I am now quite reliable about Tuesdays. When he rang just to say he'd been playing them on his drive to work, and had nearly had to pull over during the one about his first day of secondary school. You described me as heartbreakingly earnest, he said. You were. I had a briefcase. I was 11 and I had a briefcase. You did. You found it at a charity shop and you were so pleased with it. You carried it for 1 week and then you realized no other 11-year-old had a briefcase and you quietly retired it and never spoke of it again. It's in the attic. I've kept it. A long silence. Why? He said. Because you were so pleased with it. That kind of pleased deserves to be kept. Another silence. A shorter one. I'm coming for dinner on Thursday, he said. I'll make the apple cake. Deal. I have been thinking a great deal, these past months, about what memory actually is. Dr. Patel talks about it in terms of storage and retrieval, pathways and connections, which is useful and also makes me feel like a slightly malfunctioning filing cabinet. But I don't think that's quite right. Or rather, it's not the whole story. Memory isn't just storage. It's meaning. It's the reason certain things stay lit when others go dark. Because they meant something, because they shaped something, because they are, in some essential way, who you are. The chickpeas don't stay. Where I put my keys doesn't stay. But the camping holiday stays. Gerald with his useless compass stays. Daniel's briefcase stays. Fiona and the sheep. The biscuits. The bus, and Fiona fixing it, quietly, on her own, because I had somehow taught her that things could be fixed. What I have learned, over 43 recordings, is that I have not been an absent narrator of my own life. I have been present for all of it. Laughing at the wrong moments, fretting at the right ones. Too busy keeping things going to always stop and say what I meant. The tablet gave me somewhere to say it. And then the children gave me something even better. They answered back. We have, the three of us, turned the living legacy into something none of us quite expected. It is not just a record. It is a conversation. One that started late, as the best conversations often do, and has now expanded in ways that suggest it won't stop anytime soon. Fiona has recorded 11 entries of her own. Daniel has recorded 7, including a highly entertaining account of a work trip to Edinburgh that went wrong in ways I will not detail here, because it reflects badly on several innocent parties, but which he made very funny in the way he does when things go wrong, the way his father did, the gift I noted and couldn't help but miss even now. I had a check-in with Dr. Patel last week. The mild cognitive changes are still mild. They may stay mild for a long time, or they may not. He is careful about what he promises, which I respect, because careless promises are a particular kind of cruelty. I left his office and sat in the car park as I always do, this time with a different kind of biscuit. A shortbread, homemade, from the tin Fiona had pressed into my hands that morning, just because. My mother used to make shortbread when she was happy. I ate it slowly and thought about what I would record next. There was the story of the school trip to the British Museum where Daniel lost his packed lunch, and an elderly tourist gave him half a sandwich and he talked about it for weeks. There was the summer Fiona decided to learn to knit and produced a scarf of such extraordinary irregularity that it exists in a category beyond scarf. A textile object with its own internal logic, still in a drawer upstairs. There was the winter of 1999, which was cold and lean and hard, and how we got through it, the three of us, eating toast for dinner and playing every board game in the house, and somehow, by the end of it, being fine. There are so many stories. I have been alive for 67 years, which is, when you think about it, an absolute embarrassment of material. The tablet is on the kitchen table. My tea is ready. The big circle is right where it always is. Hello. I say. It's Margaret. I want to tell you about the winter of 1999. I press the circle. I begin. Outside, the light is doing that thing it does in autumn. Low and gold and briefly, brilliantly present before it goes. I notice it. I will probably mention it in the recording, somewhere, as a digression. I am learning that the digressions are not failures of concentration. They are simply the mind going where the mind wants to go, following the thread of meaning wherever it leads. I am, it turns out, still here. All of me that matters, still here. Curious and opinionated and rather fond of biscuits. And deeply, fiercely, permanently proud of my children. The selective librarian in my head can reorganize things all she likes. She cannot touch any of this. And now neither can time. A living legacy. For later. For now.